It started as a normal evening, one like any other. Sarah was in the kitchen, her hands busy washing dishes, while her husband, Mike, sat in the living room scrolling through his phone. They had been married for 5 years, and while their relationship wasn't perfect, Sarah had always believed they had built a bond strong enough to withstand anything. But that night, something felt different. Mike's tone had been unusually sharp, and the way he kept avoiding eye contact made Sarah's stomach twist with unease. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know what. "Can we talk?" Mike's voice finally broke the silence, sounding both casual and deliberate. Sarah wiped her hands on a towel, her heart pounding as she walked into the living room. The look on his face wasn't angry or sad. It was something else, something unsettling. "I need you to do something for me," Mike said, locking eyes with her in a way that sent chills down her spine. He took a deep breath before continuing, his words slow and measured. "It's unconventional, but it'll help us. Trust me." Sarah frowned, her mind racing with questions. What could he possibly mean? Her instincts screamed that whatever he was about to say would change everything, but before she could ask, Mike handed her his phone. On the screen was a message thread, and at the center of it were two men, complete strangers to Sarah. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "They're going to be part of something important for us," Mike replied cryptically. "I've already arranged everything. You just need to go along with it." Sarah's pulse quickened. The way he said it made her feel like a pawn in some kind of game she didn't understand. Her mind flashed through a dozen possibilities, none of them good. "What are you talking about, Mike? This doesn't make sense." Mike leaned forward, his expression growing more intense. "It's not what you think," he insisted. "But you have to trust me. This will fix everything." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Fix what? Their marriage? Their finances? Or was this about something darker, something she wasn't ready to face? As Mike's words hung in the air, Sarah realized she had to make a decision. But what would it cost her? Sarah's mind was spinning, but she couldn't ignore the urgency in Mike's eyes. He looked desperate, like a man clinging to the last thread of control. She hadn't seen him like this before, and it terrified her. "You're not making any sense," she said, her voice trembling. "Why are you being so vague? If this is so important, just tell me what's going on." Mike sighed heavily and stood, pacing the room like he was searching for the right words. "It's complicated, Sarah," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I've gotten us into a situation, one I didn't plan for, but if we do this, it'll all be okay." "What situation?" she pressed, her frustration rising. "Why can't you just tell me the truth?" He stopped pacing and faced her, his expression torn between guilt and determination. "I made some bad decisions, financial ones. I borrowed money from the wrong people, and now they're calling it in. I didn't know what else to do." Sarah's heart sank. She had known things had been tight lately, but she had no idea Mike had been hiding something this serious. "So what does this have to do with them?" she asked, pointing at the phone. "What are you asking me to do?" Mike hesitated, his jaw tightening. "They don't want the money anymore," he said quietly. "They want something else. They, they want you." The words hung in the air like a bomb, and Sarah took a step back, her mind refusing to process what she'd just heard. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What do you mean they want me?" Mike reached for her hand, but she pulled away, her instincts screaming at her to run. "It's not like that," he insisted. "It's just for one night. Nothing has to happen. You just need to meet them and talk. That's all." But Sarah didn't believe him. She could see it in his eyes. There was more to this, something he wasn't telling her, and whatever it was, It felt like she was being dragged into a darkness she couldn't escape. Sarah couldn't stop shaking. The words, "just meet them," echoed in her mind, each repetition louder than the last. Mike's face was unreadable now, his desperation cloaked by a forced calm that only made her trust him less. She backed away, putting more distance between them. "Do you even hear yourself?" she said, her voice cracking. "You're asking me to fix your mess by what? Sacrificing my dignity? My safety? Are you serious right now?" Mike flinched but didn't look away. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "If we don't do this, things will get worse. These people don't give second chances. They'll come after us, Sarah. After you, after me, even after your sister." Sarah froze at the mention of her sister, Emma. At only 19, Emma was practically still a kid, working late shifts at the local diner to save for college. She had nothing to do with any of this, but Sarah knew what Mike was implying. These weren't just people you owed money to. These were predators who would take what they wanted by force if they weren't appeased. "You should have told me," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with anger and betrayal. "If you were in trouble, why didn't you come to me? We could have figured something out together." Mike shook his head, guilt flashing in his eyes. "I thought I could fix it on my own. I thought I had time, but they're done waiting. Please, Sarah, this is the only way." The room felt suffocating. Sarah's mind raced with questions, each one more terrifying than the last. Who were these men? What did they truly want? And how far was Mike willing to go to save himself? She thought about walking out the door, leaving him to deal with the mess he had created. But the thought of Emma, innocent, unsuspecting Emma, held her in place. "Why me?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "What do they gain from me meeting them?" Mike hesitated, his silence more damning than anything he could have said. "You're valuable to them," he admitted after a long pause. "They know I care about you, and they think you'll listen to reason, that you'll agree." Sarah's stomach turned. This wasn't just about money. It was about control, about her becoming collateral in a dangerous game she didn't understand. She stared at Mike, feeling the cracks in their marriage widen into an unbridgeable chasm. "I don't trust you," she said softly, tears brimming in her eyes. "And I don't trust them." But even as she said it, she realized the choice might no longer be hers to make. Sarah sat alone in the dark kitchen, her head in her hands. Mike had gone to bed hours ago, leaving her to wrestle with the storm of emotions raging inside her. She couldn't believe what her life had come to. A loving husband she no longer recognized, a marriage built on lies, and now a choice that felt more like a trap. Every fiber of her being wanted to refuse, to tell Mike to deal with the consequences of his actions. But the image of Emma's smiling face kept flashing in her mind. Could she really risk her sister's safety? The house was eerily quiet, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She checked the locks on the doors and windows twice, her paranoia growing. These men, whoever they were, already knew too much about her. How long would it be before they decided to take what they wanted without waiting for her agreement? As the clock struck midnight, Sarah's phone buzzed on the counter. The message was from an unknown number. "We're waiting. Tomorrow night. Don't disappoint us." Her heart pounded as she stared at the words, the weight of their meaning pressing down on her chest. It was real. They were watching, and they weren't going to let her or Mike off the hook easily. The next day was a blur. Sarah went through the motions at work, barely able to focus on her tasks. By the time she returned home, she found Mike waiting for her in the living room, his face pale but determined. "They've confirmed the location," he said, handing her a piece of paper with an address scribbled on it. It's a private club, discreet, you'll be safe. Safe? The word felt like a cruel joke. Sarah wanted to scream at him, to demand how he could stand there and say that with any certainty. But she held her tongue, knowing it would do no good. "And if I don't go?" she asked quietly, her voice hollow. Mike didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "They'll come here. They'll make an example of us." The words sent a chill through her. She could feel the walls closing in, the noose tightening around her freedom. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah realized she had no choice but to face whatever was waiting for her. But she wasn't going in blind. If they thought she was just going to roll over and submit, they were wrong, very wrong. The drive to the address felt endless. The directions led Sarah to a part of town she had never been to before. Quiet, dark streets lined with abandoned warehouses and shadowy figures loitering on corners. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel as her phone's GPS chirped that she had arrived. The building looked inconspicuous, almost unremarkable, except for the faint neon glow of a single word: private. Sarah parked a few blocks away, her heart racing. She didn't trust Mike, the men inside, or even herself at this point. Her mind replayed every argument they'd had since the night he revealed the truth, trying to find some hidden clue, some shred of hope she had missed. But nothing came. She sat there for a long moment, debating if she should turn the car around and leave. But she knew it wasn't that simple. Running wouldn't save her, or Mike, or Emma, whoever these men were. They had made it clear they were playing by their own rules. And now Sarah was the one they wanted on the board. With a deep breath, she stepped out of the car and made her way to the building. The entrance was guarded by a tall man in a black suit who didn't say a word, only motioned for her to follow him. Inside, the space was surprisingly elegant: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a hum of low conversation that felt oddly formal. It was nothing like what she expected, but the air was heavy, suffocating with unspoken tension. A man in a gray suit approached her, his presence commanding but his expression unreadable. "Sarah," he said smoothly, as if they were old acquaintances, "we've been expecting you." He gestured for her to sit at a small table in the center of the room, where two other men were already waiting. She recognized them from the photos Mike had shown her. These were the ones who had been messaging him. "We're pleased you came," the man in gray continued. "It shows that you're someone who values family, loyalty, survival." His words were calm, but there was an edge to them that made Sarah's skin crawl. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. "I'm here, but I need answers. What's really going on?" The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Mike didn't tell you everything, did he?" "Typical. He left out the part where he wasn't just borrowing money. He was doing a little trading, promising things that weren't his to promise." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" The man leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You, Sarah, he promised you. You weren't just collateral. You were the deal. And now we're here to collect." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. But before she could react, the doors behind her swung open. A woman walked in, tall, confident, and with a sharpness in her eyes that sent a ripple of unease through the room. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "it seems there's been a misunderstanding." Sarah turned to look at her, her confusion mounting. Who was this woman, and how did she fit into this nightmare? The men stiffened, their control over the situation suddenly wavering. "I think it's time we renegotiated," the woman added, her gaze locking on Sarah. "Don't you?" The room fell silent, all eyes on the woman who had just entered. Sarah could feel the shift in energy, the men's confidence cracking under the weight of her presence. She was clearly someone of authority, someone they hadn't expected. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The woman turned to her with a faint smile, one that felt both reassuring and chilling. "My name is Ava," she said simply. "I'm here to ensure this arrangement doesn't go too far." Her tone was calm, but her words carried a weight that made the men visibly uneasy. One of them, the man in gray, stood up. "This isn't your business, Eva," he said, his voice taut with frustration. "We had a deal. She's here because of her husband's choices, not yours." Eva raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "A deal that was made under false pretenses," she replied. "Mike didn't just break your rules, he broke mine, and you know what that means." Sarah's heart raced. She had no idea what was happening, but for the first time, it felt like someone was on her side, or at least someone who wasn't entirely against her. The man in gray hesitated, his composure slipping. "This isn't how we handle things," he said, his voice quieter now. "We have a system. And your system is flawed," Eva shot back. "You thought you could manipulate her, use her as leverage. But Sarah isn't part of your game. She never was." Eva turned to Sarah, her gaze softening. "You didn't deserve any of this. Mike's mistakes are his own, and you won't pay for them. I've already dealt with him." Sarah's stomach twisted. "Dealt with him?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Eva nodded. "Let's just say Mike won't be causing you any more problems. He knew the risks when he made his choices." Before Sarah could process what that meant, Eva's attention shifted back to the men. "As for you," she said coldly, "consider this a warning. If you ever try to involve her, or anyone like her, again, you'll be answering to me. And trust me, you don't want that." The men exchanged uneasy glances before finally nodding. Without another word, they stood and left, their footsteps echoing down the marble halls. Sarah turned to Ava, her mind spinning. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice filled with both relief and suspicion. Eva's smile returned, but this time it carried a hint of something darker. "Because, Sarah," she said softly, "I don't just protect people, I recruit them, and I think you'll be perfect for what comes next." Before Sarah could respond, Eva walked away, leaving her alone in the now empty room. Her nightmare was over, or so she thought, but deep down she knew this was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. Days passed, and the weight of the events still lingered in Sarah's mind. The moment she had been dreading, the moment she thought would end in her destruction, had somehow turned into an unexpected escape. Mike was gone. Eva's cryptic warning had been more than just a threat. It was a promise. She had taken care of Mike's mess in a way Sarah could never have imagined, and now, as if by some twisted fate, Sarah was left with a new path to follow. Life returned to a strange sense of normalcy, but Sarah couldn't forget what she had learned. Mike's choices, his lies, had led them to this point, yet, in the end, it wasn't the men or their games that controlled her future. It was Ava's power. Eva, a shadow in the background of everything, had orchestrated a way out for her. But at what cost? The days that followed were filled with questions Sarah couldn't answer. Who was Ava really? What did she want with Sarah? And why had she chosen to spare her? Sarah had no answers, but one thing became clear. The life she had once known was gone, replaced by something darker, more dangerous. There was no going back now. It was late one evening when Sarah received a simple message from an unmarked number. "When you're ready, we'll talk." The words sent a chill down her spine. She didn't know what Ava wanted from her, but she knew the invitation wasn't something she could ignore. As Sarah sat alone in her apartment, the weight of the past few days finally hit her. She had survived, barely, but now she had to face the reality that the life she once had was a distant memory. What lay ahead was unknown, but Sarah was no longer afraid. For the first time in a long while, she was ready for whatever came next.